Okay, good evening, everyone. It's just about 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you for joining us this evening for our third and final installment of our virtual speaker series. My name is Kristen Norton. I am the executive director at the Laurel Historical Society, and I am joined tonight by not one, but two very special presenters, William O'Boyle and Erin Nealer from the Patuxent Research Refuge. Before I get into formal introductions, though, I do want to just go over some housekeeping really quickly. Tonight's presentation is in the webinar format. We invite you to pose any questions you may have using the Q&A feature, which is found either at the bottom or sides of your screen, depending on your device. We will address all questions at the end of the program, and I will be monitoring the chat should you wish to pose any questions that way or comments as well. As a friendly reminder, we are recording tonight's webinar, so please be on the lookout for a link to view the recording early next week, and then it will be posted on our YouTube channel shortly thereafter. So, to our formal introductions, I'm joined tonight by two members of the Patuxent Research Refuge. William O'Boyle is the Environmental Education Coordinator there. It is his birthday, I'm told, which I believe gets you bonus points, William. And he has been an informal educator for over 8 years, teaching in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and also West Virginia. Erin Nealer is the Community Engagement and Outreach Associate at the Refuge. Her background is in international development and public health, but she shifted to work on her passions close to her heart, which are outdoor access, recreation, and education. So thank you both so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you. I'm looking forward to your presentation. I will hand the virtual microphone off to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Hello, I am William O'Boyle. I'm excited to be with you all tonight. I majored in the humanities, similarly to Erin, and so I now work in the environment and with sciences, and so I love opportunities to bring the humanities and science together, and feel like this is a wonderful evening to do just that. Patuxent Research Refuge, which we're going to be talking with you a bit about, is dedicated to science as a research institution and was at one point the largest wildlife research center in the world. But we're also part of a community, and we share a unique story with those around us. So we're happy to be able to share that. So as part of that, the Patuxent Research Refuge itself is a 13,000-acre gym found between the cities of Laurel and Bowie. It's roughly the same size as both cities combined. We house the National Wildlife Visitor Center and are the only designated research refuge in the refuge system of over 570 refuges. We're also considered an urban refuge, which is a refuge within 25 miles of at least 250,000 people, which means we prioritize community partnerships and recognize for the actual 2.5 million people in our service area, we are their primary and sometimes only resource when it comes to wildlife-dependent recreation. But because we are a wildlife refuge, we strive to care for the land we manage, the way it historically would have been without as much human intervention as ag land. And so the history of our region and the natural history of Maryland are vital to our mission. I do want to take a minute here and thank our partners who you see on the screen, especially our friends at Patuxent, who sponsors interns like Erin and myself and help fund projects to help keep the refuge as a community asset, even during a federal shutdown. So as an employee sponsored by them, we are able to do programs like this and keep working and have been able to still visit and support partners offsite, including teaching over 200 students in Prince George's County Public Schools this week alone. So I really want to take a second and thank them there. So I can't go into Maryland's natural history entirely, but in short, the entire state of Maryland is unique from an ecological standpoint. It holds the nation's largest estuary primarily within its borders, and except for just barely 6% of the state, all of the water that touches Maryland soil flows into the bay. The state finds itself the southernmost range for many northern species of plants and animals like tamarack, trumpeter and tundra swans, snowy owls, and bufflehead ducks. Maryland also finds itself the historic northern range of many species, as and it keeps growing recently with the northern shift in species that we're seeing today, such as spoonbills being sighted in southern Maryland earlier this summer. Now, Maryland, needless to say, it was because of that, is home to some incredible wildlife we typically associate with Western states in our ecological past, including wolves. Two species were once found here: wood bison, eastern elk, prairie chickens. We also had eastern mountain lions, which are now all species extirpated or regionally extinct to the state. Maryland has also had species extirpated and brought back, including otters, beavers, black bears, coyotes, white-tailed deer, bald eagles, osprey, Delmarva fox squirrels, and wild turkey, which gives us a legacy of returning successfully species that we had once lost. You may be surprised seeing on the screen that West Indian manatees were on this list, but Chessie, the last documented manatee in the Chesapeake Bay, would regularly migrate to the bay and was last seen near Kent Narrows, not a far drive from the refuge recently. I say recently, meaning 2011. There's also been a lot of unique botanical exploration historically in Maryland, which our history of botanical exploration goes as far back as Captain John Smith, who explored the Chesapeake Bay, but also other botanical explorers, including William Vernon, Pere Calm, and others explored our state. Maryland's botany was so historically explored, actually, it created a bias in the taxonomic community. Many plants known today by other names were once known as a particular species from Maryland. And that is just because where their samples were collected. And they use the three epithets that I have on the screen here: species Mariana, species Marylandica, and species Marylandicum. And some still do, including Maryland pink or Indian pinks that I have here on screen. And they kept their name because their coloration resembles our state flag. And I personally love our botanical history, so if you want to pursue it more, I highly encourage you to look into these two books: Herbaceous Plants of Maryland, Woody Plants of Maryland. They're written by two brothers, Brown and Brown, and they taught at University of Maryland, College Park, Frostburg State University, Garrett Community College, and Allegheny College of Maryland. Also recommend looking into Huntia Volume 7. It's a botanical history collection through the Carnegie Mellon University. It's wonderful historical accounts of Maryland's botanical history. Now, getting more specific to the refuge itself, we have the Patuxent River on the refuge, which gives us our name. And it is the largest and longest river found entirely in the border of the state. Its name traditionally means water that flows over smooth stones, and it's very fitting, as the river is home to Maryland's state gemstone, the Maryland Riverstone, or the Patuxent Riverstone, which is an orange quartz crystal, and it forms from a high concentration of iron, which is found here as well. And for those of you interested in Laurel history, which I assume many of us are, we have the ironworks here that proves that as well. So the refuges section of the Patuxent River is more of a collection of slow, narrow streams and wetlands, which is historically what rivers would more commonly have looked like, due to the absorption of wetland plants, as well as presence of beaver, which disrupt single fast-moving channels. And these characteristics help make the river on the refuge less likely to flood, and as well as receive less damage during major weather events, and our plants are less impacted during droughts as well. It also fosters exclusive types of habitat for rare, threat, and endangered species of plants, fish, insects, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. Speaking of which, there are many species found here on the refuge, and there are more habitats than just those on the river, but also various types of wetlands, oak savannas, oak pine forests, meadows, lakes, and unique edge habitats where these ecotypes kind of meet. If you drive down our entrance and exit roads on our south tract, you'll notice that they were designed to reduce edge disturbance and keep the deep forest habitat intact. On that road is actually where I saw my first scarlet tanager, which is a species that doesn't nest near forest edges. So preserving that habitat is essential for birds like them. This ecosystem also provides space for some wonderful species such as the American pawpaw, maypops, which are some of North America's only native semi-tropical fruits. We also have persimmons, which are an incredible wildlife and human food source. Eastern prickly pear is also abundant in our North Tract, which is Maryland's only native cactus. And it is a favorite food source for squirrels and box turtles, which can also be found in abundance here. Pine sap, which is what's in the middle here, is a type of parasitic plant. It's closely related to ghost pipe, but it's distinctly red in color. Both are actually found on the refuge among other parasitic plants, and they're a unique treat for nature lovers to find, if you can find them. Also, I do want to point out that all the photos that I'm using come from iNaturalist users who visit the refuge to enjoy one of my favorite wildlife-dependent recreations, wildlife photography. I don't have the content creators on this slide, but if you look up Patuxent Research Refuge on that platform, I encourage you to give all of our wildlife photographers some attention on there. Now, there are quite a few benefits of having uninterrupted habitat, such as it being uniquely visible from space through sources of low light pollution, which makes the refuge one of the last refuges for nocturnal animals in the metro area that require low light environments, including certain species of moth, beetle, bird, and bat. Because of the amount of water, tree cover, and overall green space, this area is also a uniquely cooler space with generally healthier air quality than many other areas nearby. So on the far left of the screen, you'll see that on July 25th of this year, downtown Baltimore's first major heat wave, when it was in excess of, it says here plus 99 degrees, is actually plus 100 degrees. Whereas South Laurel, which borders the refuge and is less than 20 miles away from downtown Baltimore, while still hot, only peaked at 93 degrees, so 7-degree difference on the same day. And it was still safe to be considered outdoors. The effect that we're seeing here because of that is the urban heat island effect. And the refuge becomes exactly that, a refuge for wildlife and people who are impacted by that urban heat. Now, Patuxent is a safe space for many things to live and grow, and unfortunately, that includes invasive species not from this area that attempt to take over the ecosystem and require constant management to keep at bay. Many of these were planted either nearby or actually on the refuge for management purposes. Most notably on the refuge, we face Chinese bush clover seen on the far left there, which was actually planted on the refuge in the 1930s to try to restore nitrogen to the soil after years of farming and military occupation. And we also manage for spotted lanternflies and wavy leaf basket grass, which are two of our newest invaders to the refuge. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who has more of the people history of the refuge, other than the natural history. I'll turn it over.
Thank you, William. So I'm Erin Nealer. I'm going to sort of tie in the anthropological human history side of the refuge to what Will has already shared with you about our natural history. We're going to start with some very early Maryland history, which I think for a lot of you history buffs might feel like a review, but I want to make sure we're all starting on the same footing here. So the land that Laurel and the Patuxent Research Refuge in particular now uses was territory held by several native tribes throughout history. The Mattapanient tribe and the Patuxent people both lived on the refuge before our European settlers arrived, and they were absorbed into a larger Piscataway band in the early 1700s. These tribes are all Algonquin tribes, which means they share the Algonquin language. This is a map of the various Algonquin-speaking tribes. You can see Maryland is pink and our little area of Maryland, as well as all the way up through Canada. So In 1629, the first Lord Baltimore, George Calvert, sailed to Virginia for the very first time. He petitioned King Charles I of England to grant him the land north of the Potomac River, including the land that is now both the refuge and the city of Baltimore. By 1632, Charles I did grant that petition, but George Calvert had passed away and was succeeded by his son Cecilius, or Cecil, hence Cecil County, Calvert, the second Lord Baltimore. Cecil Calvert also named our state Maryland after Charles' wife, Henrietta Maria. The 1640s through 1670s in the refuge were characterized by a series of wars, truces, treaties, and then more wars with the native population, all of which pushed the Patuxent and Piscataway people farther north and west into what is now Pennsylvania and Western Maryland, some even as far north as northern New Jersey. I know there's a Piscataway Township up in North New Jersey. The settlers at the time were mostly Protestants, and despite Lord Baltimore's recruitment of Catholics, he was also Catholic himself. He knew that immigration from all comers would lead to the colony's success. So he established a series of land grants for immigrants starting in the 1650s. 2,000 acres were afforded to each person who brought 5 adult male indentured servants with him. And that laid groundwork for Maryland's early plantation farms. Some indentured servants were able to buy land once they had cleared their debts. Those debts are usually incurred by the high cost of purchasing passage on a ship from England, but the vast majority of indentured servants never bought land. In 1660, Maryland had 8,000 residents. By 1688, it had grown to over 25,000, and by the year 1700, there were 32,000 New Marylanders from Europe. This is a map from 1666. That large fork off of the main river there is the Potomac, and the second under that is the Patuxent. It ends with a little creature that I think looks like a raccoon. Not totally sure what we're shooting at there. You can take your best guess. So tobacco was the primary crop grown in most Chesapeake Bay colonies, and its cultivation obviously shaped the society of those colonies. Rivers were essential for the cultivation of tobacco, both because of the fertile soil right up by the shore, as well as the easy access to transportation that rivers provided. Tobacco was shipped down the Patuxent toward the bay, where it was put on boats headed for England. We know the majority of the refuge land was clear-cut for tobacco farming and livestock farming, and there's actually a tobacco barn still standing on the property today. Will, can you go to my next slide for me? Thank you. There's a tobacco barn on the left. That is not our tobacco barn. That is a stock photo because I could not find a good picture of ours, but ours is similar. Most tobacco barns are open to the air or have big doors that can be propped open because tobacco needs to hang to dry before you put it on a ship to cross the Atlantic. If it's still green, it will rot and your entire crop will be useless. Another sign that the land was cleared in our area are some of our beautiful old trees that show branches very low and very wide. So trees in a forest tend to grow straight upright because there's no incentive for them to reach out for sunshine left and right, just straight up. But a tree growing in a field to provide shade for livestock or people tends to grow wide as well as tall. And some of our beautiful old oaks have a lot of low branches. So we can tell that that area, except for that tree, was at some point cut clear. So tobacco cultivation is extremely labor intensive, and hiring indentured servants started out as essential to the success of an early plantation. But by the 1680s, indentured labor was replaced by enslaved labor, even here on the refuge. Between 1658 and 1699, the vast majority of Anne Arundel's plantations were worked by at least one enslaved person. But between 1720 and 1740, more than half of the plantations had over 20 enslaved people working on them. This dramatic increase in enslaved labor and the extreme dependence on tobacco farming led some landowners to look elsewhere to other industries to diversify their holdings a little bit. William talked about our iron-rich land here and some of our ironworks that are still visible in this area. Iron was extremely important to the colonies, but British law in the early 1700s required that any iron must stop in Britain and be taxed before it arrived in the colonies. So any iron arriving from mainland Europe had to stop, get taxed, and then sail across the Atlantic to the colonies, which was prohibitively expensive and time-consuming. The colonists actually overturned a tax in 1719, an additional tax on imported iron, and then fought Parliament for the right to manufacture our own iron here in the colonies. So the Chesapeake Bay turned out to be a perfect location for early ironworks. The surrounding rivers made transporting iron obviously very heavy, quite easy. The Maryland, Virginia soil, we have beds of iron, easy to access. And bay oyster shells were a perfect lime flux for the iron forges. This brings us to the Snowden family, who came to Maryland in 1686 when Charles II granted about 2,000 acres of land to the family in an area known as Robin Hood's Forest. We don't have a great sense of exactly where that boundaries would have been, where that forest was, but we know that it is land that now includes our north tract of the refuge. Richard Snowden built Birmingham Manor in 1690, and that estate did burn down in 1891, but the house's rubble and its outbuildings can still be found up on the north tract of the refuge by Tipton Airfield and Route 198. The Snowden family were the first iron workers in Maryland and the first family in the fork of the Patuxent River between the Patuxent and Little Patuxent to turn to iron as opposed to just farming tobacco. The Snowdens also farmed tobacco, but they had plenty of money and plenty of land to do both. By 1794, we know a mill, a furnace, and at least 2 forges are attributed to the Snowdens here in this area, and they became known as Snowden's Famous Ironworks. A grant by Lord Baltimore gave Richard Snowden an additional 10,000 acres. This seems to have included much of our North Tract, as well as a bit of land at the head of the South River, where the iron mine was situated. I think it's amazing. The iron mine was called Snowden's Reputation Supported, which speaks to the quality and the success of that mine, and is also just such a bold statement to me. Montpelier Mansion is also one of the Snowden family estates, as is Snow Hill Manor. You might know both of those in Laurel. But the refuge is home to Snowden Hall, which is the building you see on the screen here. That was constructed by Richard Snowden in the 18th century. Sometime between 1812 and 1816, the hall burned down and was rebuilt as what you see here as Rose Cottage. The idea of calling this building a cottage is amazing to me. And in the 1850s, it was expanded to 2 stories tall. Those 2 little buildings on the side were added in the 1930s. And I'll get to that in just a minute. The Snowdens built a bunch of other buildings on our refuge, including a Quaker meeting house in 1792, which was one of just 6 Quaker meeting houses in Maryland, and a Methodist church. It's likely that most of the Snowdens were Methodist, especially toward the end of the 1700s when the Church of England sort of fell off in popularity among the colonists. After the Civil War, there were Black settlements and several churches established on the Refuge North Tract. Those buildings have since burned down, but several of the cemeteries are still visible. And in 1840, Ellicott's Episcopal Chapel was built just south of Tipton Airfield on our North Tract. This land was Fort Meade's property at the time, so the building was a military chapel until it was also burned down in 1920. The cemetery there was used for burials until the 1960s. There are actually 16 known cemeteries on our north and central tracts of the refuge, not including at least 1 purported pet cemetery, which I have not been able to find any record of, but if you know more than I do, please tell me. I'd love to find that. The Snowden Family Cemetery is up by Birmingham Manor's site near Tipton Airfield. Richard Snowden I is buried there, as well as Richard Snowden II, and I think the 3rd as well, his children and grandchildren, and his wife Elizabeth. This cemetery was in use between 1748 and the mid-1860s. So our military history. Much of what is the North Tract property today was once Camp Meade. During World War I, or in 1917, Fort Meade was constructed rather hastily. We see here on the right, that photo is barracks under construction at Camp Meade. It's a little chaotic. And there were several railroad improvements made to allow for deliveries to the campsite. During World War I, over 103,000 men trained at Camp Meade. After the war was over, 96,000 soldiers were demobilized there. By the early 1920s, the government had a difficult question to answer, which is, what do we do with this temporary camp that has suddenly become kind of a permanent installation? There were plumbing improvements, electric lighting, and it came out that it was much cheaper for the government to simply buy the land outright rather than trying to restore it to the quality it was before, tearing down the buildings, removing the plumbing and electricity, and returning it to the farmers. So the site was purchased in 1928 and called Fort Leonard Wood. Nobody liked that, and by 1929, it was called Fort George G. Meade, as it has been called since. People felt so strongly about that. It was actually a rider in the Defense Appropriations Bill that year. In the 1920s, both Eisenhower and Patton served at Fort Meade. They were working on tank warfare for World War II. Many of our trails up on North Tract still exhibit they're the size and shape that they are because they were tank testing areas or trails built for half tracks, which are military trucks. They have tires in the front and then tank treads in the back, and require a specific style of trail in order to use. So next slide, please. There we go. There are 4 wrecked Crusader tanks up on North Tract today. They are not accessible by the trail. Please do not wander off the trail looking for them. I do have more photos if you are very excited to see these Crusaders up close. And the reason we'd like you to stay on the trail is the bottom right picture here. Those are unexploded ordnance. Fort Meade used our North Tract as a munitions testing ground for quite some time. And we are very confident that the trails are safe, but for legal reasons, we would really like you to stay on those trails just in case. This takes us to the establishment of the refuge. The refuge was established in 1936 by an executive order from Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it was originally just 2,670 acres as federally preserved land for research and study, mostly what is now our Central Tract. This is where Snowden Manor is, and this is when that manor house was expanded to have those little wings on the side. That was office buildings. It was truly a beautiful building at the time, and I'm a little jealous of our government researchers who got to work from it. Initially, the refuge was completely off limits to the public, but in 1991, the Army was trying to sell off the weapons testing grounds at Fort Meade, north of the refuge, as part of the Base Realignment and Closure Act. And Congress stepped in and arranged for that 8,100 acres to be transferred over to refuge land. We also gained another 1,500 acres in the south from the US Department of Agriculture. So that brings us to our current size of about 13,000 acres today. I'm gonna hand you back to William for some conversation about our current or our legacy of environmental research.
Thank you so much, Erin. So wildlife research is a very unique field. It can take place in a lab, in the field. It can take concurrently at the same time in both. And something that Aldo Leopold, who is one of our kind of thought leaders in conservation in our last century, he considered wildlife research to be one of the most important things an individual could do to find themselves connected on the land that they find themselves in. So Patuxent Research Refuge has many, many legacy research projects and supported research on wildlife for decades. And so I'm only going to primarily speak on 2 that I feel we are best known for. And these 2 legacy projects are bioaccumulation and endangered species recovery. So in about the 1920s and onward, the United States and the world as a whole was in an agricultural bloom. Never before had there been so many people, but also never had there been so many ways to produce, mass produce food. However, crops and people faced coexistence problems that hit their peaks in the 1940s and 30s. And I'm not just talking about the war in Europe and Asia, but also the war on wildlife. There was a cure-all solution for the wildlife problem, especially our war on insects. And it was thought that the cure would be found in chemistry. And for the environment, that chemistry solution came in the name of DDT, which was a miracle insecticide, and it was used everywhere by the pound. You'd spray it on your kids, spray it on your pets, spray it on your crops, spray it wherever. And it was actually recommended, if you're spraying it on crops, to use 5 pounds per acre. So Dr. Lucille Stickle, who's pictured on the left here, she was here at the Patuxent Research Refuge in the 1940s as one of our leading chemical scientists, and she wanted to test the impacts that DDT had on wildlife, especially because it was rumored as an effective way to remove invasive insects like gypsy moths, which are now known as spongy moths, and had already been something that wildlife researchers and managers had put to work. Kind of a shoot first, ask later kind of question. So she decided to experiment with it, and she sprayed a 1-acre portion of the Patuxent Research Refuge on our Central South Tract border. And she found that not only did every insect die, not just moths, but all others, but also that mice died. And upon researching the mice deaths, her lab found that the mice had higher concentrations of DDT than what were found in the insects. Even though the mice weren't given a greater dose, only that what the insects were exposed to in the same environment. Upon further study, it was found that the mice, which were insectivores, were eating contaminated insects. And we just like how we don't eat one meal in a day, our mice didn't just eat one insect. And each insect they ate was a dose of DDT. She went on further and found that as it moves up the food chain, such as if a predatory bird eats a mouse that was contaminated by DDT, they get an even higher concentration than the mice received. So this breakthrough was a discovery of what is bioaccumulation. And the research that Dr. Stickle's lab had conducted here in 1947 was a powerful source for Rachel Carson, who had access to this research from Dr. Stickle's lab's work when she was editor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in D.C. while living nearby in Silver Spring, Maryland. And the work that Dr. Lucille Stickle did, as well as her lab, was quoted heavily in Silent Spring. So another prominent research project done here at Patuxent was endangered species captive rearing. So the refuge has a wonderful ability that it can boast that the research that brought back the American bald eagle, the black-footed ferret, the bobwhite quail, California condors, the Indian condor, was all primarily done here on site. In the early days, it was uncertain how to bring an endangered species back to healthy numbers through just conservation alone. And it would take a long time to do, and time was running out for many species, as by the 1940s, we had already lost many species, including the passenger pigeon. So also in the 1940s, whooping cranes, which were North America's, and still are, North America's tallest bird. And it was the most prominent species of recovery that we did here. It is estimated that in 1940s, there were only 14 known birds in the world. Modern genetic data shows that there must have actually been about 21. So to say these birds were a challenge working with such small numbers is an understatement, especially when they take 9 to 12 years before they reach sexual maturity. And from that point on, they live to the ripe old age of 30. And they lay at most 1 egg per year. And they're also primarily solitary. And they hate being around others, even of their same species. And on top of that, they imprint very well, which makes them very aggressive to anything as an adult that doesn't vaguely look like what raised them. So much so that sandhill cranes, which were the surrogate moms of the first batch, sandhill cranes were preferred over other whooping cranes when that first batch became adults. And it would have almost been 9 to 12 years of research would have been completely wasted. That is until our researchers and people like Dr. George Archibald, who is pictured here on the left, who is the founder of Cranes International, came around. He's pictured with a whooping crane on top and a blackneck crane underneath. And he and the endangered species recovery team here suggested two things. First, these birds, they do in fact need to be raised by humans so that we can better understand their personalities. That can help us with our release program. But also that those humans, to beat the imprinting problem, should wear costumes to teach the cranes to be more effective cranes as adults. So on the right here, you can see juvenile whooping cranes with a costume and volunteer here. And in the 1960s, when these proposals were being made, it was pretty much considered a harebrained idea, but it turned out that it worked. And this project became the Patuxent Research Refuge's second longest research program, spanning until 2019, when the program was actually deemed a success. And it was deemed a success largely because the birds were rearing young in the wild and there was a growing population. So I'm going to turn it back over to Erin.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we'll
going to
take
talk a little bit about what research is going on at the refuge today. So I saw a question about that. Here is your answer. Research today is mostly conducted by researchers on our central tract. So that is the strip of land you can see south of the Patuxent and north of 197 on our refuge. This area is also known as the Eastern Ecological Science Center. It is usually closed to the public. Every so often there will be a special event that opens it up. And our research is done in partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Geological Survey. All right, next slide for me. One of our research teams is our bird banding lab. The bird banding lab has an incredible history. They were founded in 1920, established after the ratification of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918. Originally in Washington, D.C., but during World War II moved up to the refuge, and as sort of a happy accident, discovered that our power lines installed on the refuge were a perfect location for bird capture and release. So on the left here, you see a photo of one of our power right-of-ways where the undergrowth is maintained at a specific height, both for the safety of the power lines and the folks working on them. But also, you can very barely see it in this picture, but there's a mist net strung up there. Mist nets are very fine mesh nets used to temporarily trap an unsuspecting bird, like this poor cardinal on the right who is getting tagged. They have little cuffs, bracelets with numbers and codes on them, and then the bird is released. It does not harm the bird in any way, and it helps our scientists monitor migratory activity and population health indicators for our local and our migratory birds. In the year 2018, our lab boasted approximately 1,500 to 1,800 individual bird captures for about 70 to 75 unique species. And that was their year-on-year rates. So every year we'd find about 15 to 1,800 individual birds. Next up, we've got our bee lab. The USGS Bee Lab supports research on our native bees. Part of that program is taking these incredible high-resolution public access photos of different species of bee. You can see on the right here, our researcher is looking under a electronic microscope, and that is being projected up on their computer screen. It is really necessary in order to accurately species identify Maryland's native bees. To get that level of magnification, this is technology that wasn't available to us even just 10 years ago. So these folks really have their work cut out for them. And they boast that they are the only group in the US government, Department of the Interior, who has the expertise to identify native bees down to their species. This is especially tricky. Most of our bees in Maryland are smaller than a grain of rice. So that incredible magnification and high resolution photography is really breathtaking in that context. Next up, we have our research with our sea duck colony. It's part of the Sea Duck Joint Venture, which is a partnership with the US and Canadian governments, as well as a bunch of nonprofits and organizations working for conservation. On the left, we have 2 scaup ducklings, I believe, being taught to tap a target with their beak when they hear a specific sound played. The researcher is handing him a tiny little mealworm treat. If you've ever trained a dog, it's remarkable how similar this seems to be. And the duck on the right is a long-tailed duck diving to do the same activity as an adult. The reason we would teach ducks to differentiate between different sounds is for a bunch of different research purposes, but in particular, I'm aware of a study that they're doing about fishing net trapment for ducks. So when a fisherman accidentally catches a duck in a net with fish, the duck is tangled up, the net is trash, the duck usually dies, the fish get out through the hole in the net, and it's a bad day for everybody, for the fisherman, certainly a bad day for the duck. I guess it's a good day for the fish, but the idea was, well, what if we can play a specific tone that the ducks can associate? Oh no, a fishing boat is coming, we got to get out of here. So what sounds can ducks hear that fish can't hear? Fascinating problem, and one that I did not know about until I met our duck researchers. Next up, please, we have research on toxicology and lead in our environment. So looking at lead shot and lead bullets, as well as lead fishing bobbers and fishing weights, not bobbers, I suppose, and our impacts both on the environment, so the water quality, the soil quality, as well as human health. So if you're hunting and lead is in your food, what is that doing in the long term? Is that building up in your body or in the body of our wildlife? And last but certainly not least, we have Monarch Magic, which is one of my favorite little research projects done at the visitor center. And this is something that we encourage visitors to come take part in. Started in 2018, we host hundreds of monarch butterfly eggs, caterpillars, and adult butterflies as they grow in a special nursery designed in our visitor center. So our volunteers feed and monitor the butterflies' growth. They tag them for identification. You can see that butterfly on my hand has a little sticker on its wing. It does not harm them in any way, and it helps us track the migration patterns of the monarch butterfly. Every day between midsummer and early fall, every day at our visitor center that we have butterflies, we like to do a butterfly release. So that's usually around noon. And if you're a visitor at our visitor center, you can help our scientists release some butterflies, which is always fun for all ages. Not going to pretend like it's just for kids. That is my hand in the photo, so you know how I feel about it. All right, back to you, Will, for the future of our refuge.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, so as we move forward with projects today, we still hearken to our past and our legacy, as well as our community of Laurel, as well as the community that we've created all over the world. So this is just kind of a little highlight of some different things. So famously, Chandler Robbins is probably the most renowned individual to be associated with Patuxent Research Refuge. His work brought an enthusiasm for birding to the world, whether it was by writing or contributing to the field guide that includes sounds of bird calls, not just morphological characteristics, whether it's the fact that he was one who banded Wisdom, the albatross, the oldest known albatross, and well as continuing to visit her at Midway Atoll, or even being one of the few scientists to lead birding walks on the refuge. It is, to me, and I'm sure I can speak to Erin as well, it is a privilege to be working somewhere that is so closely associated with someone who shares publicly such a love of birds and bringing that love to his community. And so it is now wonderful seeing him honored likewise by that community through the new mural here in Laurel. as well as through the dedications that we've recently done for our Wisdom and Chan Robbins trails, as well as our outdoor education center that's found here on the south track of the refuge. We're also very proud of our legacy of being a world scientific authority, being at one point the largest wildlife research facility in the world and the only refuge dedicated to research in our entire system. I'll repeat it again. Aldo Leopold was one of our, again, leaders in conservation in our last century. He described wildlife research as being the most important of the wildlife dependent activities that somebody could do. So being a refuge whose mission from the very beginning has been to achieve those means, it's a very unique privilege as well. I also want to highlight our community. So we cannot do the programs like we do without community support, whether it's volunteers, friends, members, even simply just participating and showing up to the refuge. Our volunteers do a vast majority of the work here on the refuge, from cutting grass, planting gardens, teaching, front desk work, monarch magic, and even other science programs as recently as Bluebird box nest monitoring that was done a couple years ago, and even raising and caring for whooping cranes when we were doing that project. That was a volunteer operated program. Our friends group sponsors many of the interns who work here on the refuge, including myself and Erin, as well as interns for USGS that conduct a lot of the science here. They also sponsor material needs for our programs like field trips or monthly film and speaker series. They also support projects like the Kids Discovery Center, which is also found here at the National Wildlife Visitor Center. It's a Montessori education center, and it updates monthly. The participation that people give and the feedback associated with that gives us guidance for where we can continue in the future. Such as recently, we've been receiving a lot of suggestions to do more evening programs, and I can't speak right now as the shutdown, but I could foresee many of those programs coming down the pipeline. And so we're also a refuge for the people. And to effectively be that, we need to hear something by the people to understand how and what we need to do to best serve you, which is especially important because finally we get to celebrate our 90th birthday as a refuge at the same time as the United States is celebrating its 250th. So we expect to continue highlighting our legacy and continue to try offering programs that support our communities and partners that have been able to join us in this incredible 90-year journey. Thank you, and I believe we'll turn it over to questions, and I'll stop sharing here, but I'll make sure my email and Erin's email is also up in case you have questions and don't want to ask them right now. You can ask us later.
Well, thank you both for that presentation. That was wonderful. I really enjoyed learning more about the natural history and the built environment and all the projects you've worked on and are doing. And again, I want to just plug for you all that you have loads of volunteer opportunities. There's something for gardeners and history buffs and everybody in between. But don't volunteer for Monarch Magic. I would like to do that one myself. I would like to claim that one right now. No, I'm just kidding.
We need all the help we can get, so we'll take anybody who's interested.
Oh.
It's quite a team to support. I think this year was 1,700 butterflies. So yeah, all hands on deck.
Sounds amazing. There is one question that I see has gone unanswered, and it's one I think we're all thinking.
I would love an answer as well, please.
William, what is the story with the polar bear behind you?
So it's actually not a polar bear. It is a brown bear, and as you can probably see around me, we have a variety of taxidermy, which is wonderful that and a privilege that we can use them as a federal organization. These primarily are used for education here at the refuge. Sometimes they get to travel around, but primarily we use them here at the refuge to try to help foster an appreciation for wildlife. So it can be very difficult for someone to want to support brown bear conservation if they have no idea what a brown bear looks like, or if they have no idea of what they do in the ecosystem. So being able to use our brown bear, our bobcat, our Canada goose, we have an osprey, some squirrels, all these kinds of things that when they're taxidermy, these things can take on a life, a second life. Something that, you know, they can continue for decades and to continue to educate and be a part of the world.
I would also like to add that we do have a polar bear at our visitor center. Um, she was seized as part of the Fish and Wildlife poaching initiative. And so, we did not have a polar bear on the refuge at any point, except for this taxidermied friend, who again, what a strange thing to have, but delightful for education purposes to be able to meet a polar bear.
I want to give folks another minute or two to submit any questions they might have. I don't see any more lingering in the chat or the Q&A, but that doesn't mean there aren't some brewing. While we're waiting, I will just say we have recordings of our other virtual speaker series programs currently up on our YouTube. And so I encourage you, particularly if you're interested in gardening, to look at the Building a Vibrant Garden that Jimmy Rogers did in September. That's up on our YouTube. It feels like it goes with this one quite well. So seeing no other questions.
It just means we were thorough. I feel like we went very quickly. So if anything comes to you later, like William was saying, please don't hesitate to shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you.
I do see one question did pop up.
Oh, great.
A very general one. Can you tell us about fishing, from Joe?
Yeah, Will, you're an angler. Do you want to take this one?
Sure thing. Just generally, fishing is a lot of fun. Fishing here on the refuge is also a lot of fun. And we do offer fishing seasonally here at our Cache Lake, as well as up at our North Tract on Lake Allen, and a couple other lakes that we use for recreation purposes. Something I mentioned earlier is that we try to keep the refuge to what Maryland would have looked like in its natural history. There was never at any point a lake in Maryland occurring naturally. We have the only lakes that the state has are man-made. And so we do have lakes specifically for recreation, specifically fishing. So if you want to fish here at the refuge, unfortunately, our fishing season is closed because our migratory birds that rely on fish and open waters, they're currently using our lakes. If you want to come check those birds out, you're more than welcome to. But you just can't fish next to them because we don't want to disturb them. I believe our fishing season will open back up April 1st. No joke.
Yeah, so fishing is April through September. I just popped a quick link into the Q&A. So if anybody else is interested in fishing, we also often have fishing events specifically for youth. So that tends to be folks under 16 who in the state of Maryland do not require a fishing license. For adults, we do require fishing licenses, but for our special event days, we like to teach kids how to fish. So if there are kids in your life who might like to learn, keep your eye on our event page this spring. Like Will said, starting in April, we'll start seeing more of those events.
Yeah, and it is wonderful seeing those kinds of events. I believe just this past summer, we were working with a local rec center who came out and they had a wonderful time learning how to fish. And one of their counselors who'd never gone fishing before on his first fishing trip pulled in, I believe it was a 3.5 or a 4-pound bass out of one of our lakes. So it was an incredible story for him on one of his first fishing trips to be able to do something like that. So it's a wonderful opportunity.
I see a question from Mark. Do you mind if I jump on that one? Sorry, I got excited. It's a bird question. Are there bald eagles on the refuge? Yes, there are. I don't think currently have any nesting families of bald eagles on the refuge. William, correct me if I'm wrong, at least not on our South Tract. Bald eagle nests are ginormous and pretty easy to spot from afar. But I do know, I have seen eagles on the refuge regularly. I was driving our truck a couple months ago and a bald eagle grabbed a, not sure, rat, squirrel, something right off the road right in front of me. So I kind of had to slam on the brakes before I accidentally committed a felony. But yeah, we definitely have bald eagles. They love fishing in our lakes. So we see them quite a bit. I hope that answers your question.
Amazing. Just another reason to take a field trip.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions popping up, so and I don't want to monopolize your time. I want to thank you both, William and Erin, for joining us and for that wonderful presentation. Happy birthday again to William. And happy Friday Eve to everybody who joined. Just a reminder to please keep an eye out for the link to view the recording. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I hope this is the first of many future collaborative projects between the Laurel Historical Society and the Patuxent Research Refuge. And
thank you, Kristen. This was a real pleasure. And we're glad we got to meet all of you guys in the comments and questions. So thank you for your time.
thank you, everyone.
Thank
Wish
you
you all a
all.
wonderful evening. Take care.
All right. Bye, folks.